Hello. Tonight, we open an old case file, but one that has never rested. Our first piece of evidence is Exhibit A. It's not a single object, but a forest of them. Go to the Temple of Mut at Karnak in Thebes. Walk through the courtyard. You will find them, hundreds of them, seated and standing, carved from black, unforgiving diorite. Statue after statue of the same figure, a woman's body, dressed in a tight sheath, but with the head of a lioness. This is Sekhmet. The sun disk and cobra rest on her brow. Her face is not serene. It is the impassive, terrifying face of a predator. There are over 700 of these statues, an obsessive, repetitive act of devotion, or of fear. Why would a pharaoh commission this many identical, imposing, and unsettling statues? It feels less like worship and more like an attempt to contain or appease a terrible power. This stone forest is an echo of an ancient, terrifying story. A story that you may not want to be there when the truth surfaces. Before we continue, please like and subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy this investigative storytelling style. Tonight's file is on this goddess, Sekhmet, and the near apocalypse she unleashed. What are your hypotheses about her true purpose? Dim the lights, open your skeptical eyes, and enter the case file. The common fact, the one we all know, is that Ra was the supreme god, the sun god, the creator, the divine king who ruled over both the gods and mankind, his creation. He was the source of all light and life, the maintainer of Ma'at, divine order. But our case file opens on a papyrus, the book of the heavenly cow, and it tells a story of when that order was broken. The myth begins not with a monster from the darkness, but with a rebellion from within. Ra had grown old. The papyrus tells us his bones were silver, his flesh was gold, and his hair was true lapis lazuli. And mankind, his own children, saw his age. They saw weakness. They began to mock him. They conceived plots and spoke words of rebellion against him. This was the ultimate sin. Humanity, the creation, turning against its creator. This is the odd, lesser-known detail. Ra's response. He does not strike them down with a thunderbolt. He is hurt and he is cautious. He calls a secret emergency council of the primeval gods, those who existed with him in the dark chaos before creation, including Nun, the primeval ocean itself. He asks them, "What should I do?" The council's response is unanimous and brutal. They tell him, "Let your eye go forth against them." The eye of Ra was not just a metaphor, it was his most powerful and dangerous aspect, a feminine, divine force that acted as his protector and avenger. Ra agrees. He plucks this divine power, this fire, from his own being. He gives it form. He shapes it into a new goddess, a perfect weapon designed for one purpose and one purpose only: slaughter. He gives this weapon the head of a lioness, the most efficient and merciless hunter on the Nile. And he names her Sekhmet, she who is powerful. Historians still debate whether this myth was a simple morality tale about the dangers of blasphemy, or if it was a sophisticated political allegory, a state-sanctioned story used by pharaohs to justify their own brutal crackdowns on rebellions. Was this myth a way to say, the king's mercy is great, but his vengeance, when summoned, is divine, total, and terrifying? The papyrus is clear. This was not a warning shot. This was not a show of force. Ra created Sekhmet and unleashed her upon the mortal world with a single, devastating command to exterminate the rebellion. Sekhmet, the newly born weapon of Ra, descended from the heavens to the sands of Egypt. And as we will see, she did not just punish the rebels. She began a joyous, systematic annihilation of the entire human race. This is where the case file moves from a divine judgment to a forensic report of a mass slaughter. The common fact, the one accepted by all Egyptologists, is that the Book of the Heavenly Cow is one of the most important and revealing mythological texts we have. It's not a fringe piece of lore. It's found inscribed in the tombs of New Kingdom pharaohs, including Tutankhamun and Seti I. This was state-sanctioned theology. This was the story the kings themselves wanted to be buried with. And this is the story they told. Sekhmet, the lioness, the powerful one, did not make distinctions. She did not stop to ask who was a rebel and who was loyal. She was a weapon of mass destruction, and her only directive was to kill. The papyrus tells us she set about slaughtering humanity in the deserts. This was not a swift, clean punishment. The text is chillingly specific. It describes a goddess who became lost in her work, a predator who acquired a taste for her own divine mission. The odd, lesser-known detail, the one that moves this myth from a simple allegory to a horror story, is her joy. The Book of the Heavenly Cow is explicit. Sekhmet found a joy in her heart as she waded through the blood of her victims. She is described rejoicing in the slaughter. This is not a reluctant soldier following orders. This is a being of pure rage taking pleasure in annihilation. Imagine the scene not as a cartoon on a papyrus, but as the text demands we see it. The desert, which was supposed to be the staging ground for the rebellion, became a killing floor. The sand turned dark, not with water, but with blood. The text says she would wade in their blood. It's an image of visceral, physical contamination. She was not just killing, she was reveling. The slaughter was so total, so apocalyptic, that it terrified her own creator. Ra, the god who had unleashed her, looked down from the heavens. He saw his eye, his own vengeance, succeeding all too well. She was not just punishing the rebels. She was on track to annihilate the entire human race, to leave the earth a sterile, empty rock. Ra had wanted to teach mankind a lesson not to erase his own creation. He had to stop her. But you cannot reason with a force like Sekhmet. You cannot command a lioness mid-hunt to simply stop. Her bloodlust was now all-consuming. Ra realized in a panic that his own weapon was now out of his control. She would kill all day, and when night fell, she would simply wait for the dawn to continue her hunt. She would not rest until the last human heart had stopped beating. Historians still debate whether this apocalyptic story is a distant, distorted cultural memory of a real-world catastrophe. Was this a way to explain a sudden, devastating plague that wiped out a huge portion of the population? Was it a memory of a brutal war or a drought-induced famine personified as a vengeful, bloodthirsty goddess? The text, in this light, is not just a myth. It is a record of trauma, an attempt to rationalize an event so terrible that it could only be the act of an angry god. The text is clear. Ra, the divine king, had a choice to make. He had to save the cowering, terrified remnants of humanity from his own perfect weapon. But how do you stop a goddess who is drunk on slaughter? The Council of Gods convened again in a panic, and this time they didn't devise a weapon. They devised a trick, a desperate, brilliant, and bizarre plan. To save humanity, they would have to get the goddess of vengeance hopelessly blind drunk. Ra was trapped. His divine weapon, as we saw in Section 2, was now a rogue state, an autonomous force of nature that had acquired a taste for its own terrible work. Sekhmet, drunk on blood, would not listen to reason. She would not obey a command to stand down. Force was useless. She was the ultimate expression of divine force. The common fact that defines this myth is that Ra, the all-powerful creator, has to resort to cunning. He has to trick his own daughter. He summons his council, but this is not a war meeting. It is a conspiracy. He needs a plan to save the cowering remnants of humanity. The Book of the Heavenly Cow tells us he sends for the swiftest messengers and gives a series of precise, desperate commands. This is not a plan for a battle. It is a recipe. He commands the temples to brew beer. This is the first ingredient. Beer, as we know, was the staple of Egyptian life, a thick, nutritious brew. He commands them to make it in quantities that dwarf any normal festival. But this is not the crucial part. He then gives a second command. He orders his servants to go to Elephantine, to the very border of Egypt, and to bring back jedj in vast quantities. This is our odd, lesser-known detail, jedj, or red ochre, a mineral pigment, a dye. This is the genius of the trick. Ra orders the brewers to mix the red ochre with the beer. They are to work all night under his direct supervision. The goal is not just to brew beer, but to create a perfect counterfeit. They are to dye the beer the exact color, the exact deep, dark, ruby red of human blood. The scale of this operation is the key to the entire case file. This is not a symbolic gesture. The texts are specific. Ra commands the creation of 7,000 jars of this blood beer. It is an industrial-scale deception. As the sun is setting and Sekhmet is resting from her first day of slaughter, Ra's servants take these 7,000 jars to the fields of Dendera, the place where she intends to continue her hunt at dawn. And they pour. They do not set the jars out. They flood the fields. The text says, the beer filled the fields to a depth of 3 palms. Imagine the scene, a vast, shallow lake, gleaming in the last light of dusk, not with water, but with a dark red liquid that looks, smells, and settles just like the gore Sekhmet has been wading in for an entire day. Historians still debate whether this entire story is a mythological just-so tale, a way to explain the origins of a very real and very wild religious festival, the Festival of Intoxication, where the entire population, priests and commoners, would engage in a massive, ecstatic, drunken revelry to honor the pacification of the goddess. Was this myth created to provide a divine charter for a public party? Or is the myth older and the festival a desperate, ritualized reenactment, an act of sympathetic magic to keep the goddess drunk and docile, to prevent the real-world plagues she represented from ever returning? The evidence is the trap itself. The 7,000 jars are empty. The fields are a lake of red. The sun is about to rise. And Sekhmet, the great lioness, is stirring. Her heart is full of the joy of the hunt, and she is thirsty for more blood. The entire fate of humanity now rests on this single, colossal deception. The trap was set, the 7,000 jars were empty, and the fields of Dendera were a glistening, 3-palm-deep lake of red. The common fact that defines this myth is the climax that happens at dawn. The Book of the Heavenly Cow tells us that Sekhmet, The great lioness returned to the field to continue her slaughter. She was, as the text implies, thirsty. She saw the vast red-dyed lake. The rising sun glinted off its surface. It looked exactly like the gore she had been wading in the day before. The text says, "Her face was beautiful in it." She saw her own reflection in what she believed to be a sea of human blood. She did not question it. She was a predator. And this was her kill. She stooped to drink. The papyrus states she found it good in her heart. The taste, the thick, fermented, sweet taste of Egyptian beer, pleased her. So she drank, and she drank, and she drank. She was a goddess, a being of divine capacity, and she was consuming a divine quantity. She waded through the field, lapping at the beer, until all 7,000 jars, an entire lake of high-potency alcohol, were gone. The effect was immediate and total. This is the odd, lesser-known detail. The intoxication was not a mild stupor. It was a complete, system-wide failure. The bloodlust, the divine rage, the predator's focus, it was all drowned in a wave of alcohol. The powerful one was now powerless. The text says her heart was made gentle. She could no longer find the rage to kill. She could not even find the ability to stand. The great, terrifying lioness, the weapon of Ra, was hopelessly, comically, and divinely drunk. And she fell into a deep, deep sleep. This is the great pacification. Ra's trick had worked. Humanity, cowering in the rocks, was saved. But this is where the story takes its most critical turn. The goddess who awoke was not the same one who fell asleep. The intoxication had, in a mythological sense, washed the blood from her. The rage was gone, metabolized. The goddess who rose was transformed. The lioness, Sekhmet, the Lady of Terror, had reverted to her other original form. She was now Hathor, the gentle, beautiful, cow-headed goddess. Hathor, the Lady of Joy, the goddess of love, music, dance, and, most fittingly, of intoxication. This is the central paradox of the Egyptian pantheon. Sekhmet and Hathor are not two different goddesses. They are two faces of the same coin. They are the same divine feminine power, the Eye of Ra, in its two states, rage and joy, creation and destruction, pestilence and celebration. Historians still debate whether this transformation was considered permanent, or if it was a cyclical, temporary fix. Was Sekhmet truly cured by this one great drunken party? Or did the myth imply that her rage was always just beneath the surface, sleeping it off, and that humanity was now required to reenact this event? The festival of intoxication, where all of Egypt would drink to excess, was perhaps not just a celebration of this event. It may have been a vital piece of sympathetic magic, a yearly ritual to keep the goddess drunk, happy, and pacified, to ensure that the lioness never, ever woke up again. This myth provided a critical origin story. It explained the duality of divine power. But for the average Egyptian walking the earth, this was not just a story from the distant past. Sekhmet was not a myth. She was a real, active, and terrifying force in their daily lives. And she was just getting started. The myth we've just investigated, the one that ended in a drunken cosmic party, is a neat and tidy story. It has a beginning, a middle, and a clear, happy ending. The lioness sleeps, humanity is saved, and the Lady of Joy, Hathor, is born from the appeasement. But this is where the case file takes its most critical turn. For the ancient Egyptians, this was not just a story from the distant past. The pacification was not permanent. The lioness was not cured. she was just asleep. And the primary daily terror of Egyptian life was the fear of waking her up. The common fact that historians have always known is that Sekhmet was a goddess of war and divine retribution. She is she who is powerful. We see her on temple reliefs, protecting the pharaoh in battle, breathing fire against his enemies, a divine guardian of the king. This is her official state-sponsored role, but this case file is about the popular imagination, the fear of the common man. And to him, Sekhmet was something far more immediate and terrifying. This is the odd, lesser-known detail. Her primary day-to-day role was not as a goddess of war. It was as the Lady of Pestilence. To the ancient Egyptian, disease was not a random biological event. It was not caused by unseen germs. It was a divine act, a sudden burning fever, a wasting sickness, a child who died in the night, or a wave of infection that wiped out a village. This was not bad luck. This was Sekhmet. She had unleashed her messengers or her arrows, the setu, which were the invisible darts of plague. This fundamentally reframes our understanding of this goddess. She wasn't just a mythological threat of a past apocalypse. She was the active, present explanation for every unexplained death. She was the goddess of epidemiology, a hot desert wind, the Khamsin that carried sickness. That was the breath of Sekhmet. She was the sudden, violent death that came from nowhere. This created a terrifying and intimate relationship. The Egyptians lived in a state of constant low-level negotiation with a goddess whose natural state was rage and whose hobby was slaughter. The myth from the Book of the Heavenly Cow was not a children's story. It was an operating manual. It was a case file that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Sekhmet could be pacified. But it required a specific ritual action, and this is where her cult gets complicated. The priests of Sekhmet were not just people who prayed to her. Because she was the goddess of disease, her priests were, by necessity, the primary physicians of Egypt. They were the doctors. This is the central paradox. The only people who could heal you, the only ones who understood the cures, were the very same people who served the goddess who was trying to kill you. Historians still debate whether the priests of Sekhmet were practicing what we would call rational medicine, or if they were exclusively ritual exorcists. Were their cures simply magical incantations and amulets designed to appease the goddess's rage? Or did they, through trial and error, develop a real pharmacopeia of effective herbal remedies, which they then framed as a divine gift from the goddess? The evidence suggests it was an inseparable blend of both. To them, healing a plague was not about killing a virus. It was about getting the lioness to go back to sleep. The entire religious machine of her cult was a containment protocol. The festival of intoxication from Section 4 was not just a memory. It was a vital, yearly reenactment. It was an act of national sympathetic magic. If they could get drunk for her, if they could appease her with music, dance, and beer, perhaps she would remain in her gentle Hathor form, and the plagues would stay away for one more year. But as we're about to see, one pharaoh believed that a yearly party was not nearly enough to keep this monster caged. The containment protocol we identified in Section 5, the annual Festival of Intoxication, was a national insurance policy against the Lady of Pestilence. It was a yearly collective prayer hoping to keep the lioness drunk and docile. For most of Egypt's history, this, combined with the daily rituals of her priests was enough. But this case file now turns to a pharaoh and a moment in time when it was clearly, terrifyingly not enough. The common fact is that the pharaoh Amenhotep III, father of the famous Akhenaten, ruled during the absolute golden peak of Egypt's power. His reign was one of unparalleled wealth, international diplomacy, and monumental construction. He built the opulent Temple of Luxor and a mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes that was, in its time, the largest and most magnificent in all of Egypt. This was a man at the pinnacle of human power, a dazzling sun disk, who saw himself as a living god. But this is where the archaeological record presents a dark, obsessive mystery. This is the odd, lesser-known detail that becomes the central exhibit of our case. The single largest, most repetitive, and most obsessive commission of his entire opulent reign was not a monument to his own glory. It was the forest of stone we introduced in Exhibit A. Amenhotep III ordered his royal workshops to mass-produce statues of Sekhmet. Not one, not 10. He commissioned, in unforgiving black diorite and granite, more than 700 statues of the lioness goddess. Let's try to comprehend that number. Many of these statues were over life-size. This is an industrial-scale production. He was, in essence, creating a statue for every day of the year, and then doubling it. These were not placed randomly. They were installed in a precise ritual pattern throughout his massive mortuary temple, and as we saw, in the temple of Mut at Karnak, which was linked to Hathor, her pacified form. This is not art. This is not decoration. This is a state of emergency. This is the act of a terrified man. Archaeologists and paleopathologists sifting through the evidence of this period have a compelling hypothesis for what triggered this lithic obsession, a devastating plague. Sometime during Amenhotep III's golden reign, a pestilence appears to have swept through the Nile Valley, killing thousands, striking at the very heart of the empire's power. The gods, it seemed, were angry, and in Egypt, plague had only one name, Sekhmet. The pharaoh, the living god, was powerless. His armies, his gold, his diplomacy, all were useless against an invisible, divine enemy. He fell back on the only operating manual he had, the myth of the Book of the Heavenly Cow. The lioness was awake, and the yearly drunken festival was no longer working. She required a new, permanent, and overwhelming act of appeasement. Historians still debate whether this was an act of genuine personal terror or a calculated political response. Was Amenhotep III, the man, genuinely terrified for his life and the life of his family? Or was Amenhotep III, the pharaoh, performing a colossal act of state theater? By commissioning this forest of statues, he was demonstrating to his panicked, plague-stricken population that he, their divine king, was the only one with the piety and the resources to confront the goddess head-on. He was showing them that he was managing the crisis. Each statue was a ritual trap. Each one would have received daily offerings, a constant stream of appeasement, 365 days a year. He wasn't just building a temple. He was building a containment grid, a permanent stone festival of intoxication. He was attempting to placate the lioness, not just once a year, but every single day in triplicate, hoping to trap the Lady of Pestilence in a cage of black stone. The common fact that we've established is that the cult of Sekhmet was a vast state-sponsored containment protocol. We have the Book of the Heavenly Cow as the mythological precedent, and Amenhotep there's 700 statues as the physical proof of a national panic. But this leads to the most complex part of the case file. If Sekhmet is the source of all plagues, what then is the cure? This is where the paradox of her cult becomes a matter of life and death. The odd, lesser-known detail is the specialized role of her priesthood. The priests of Sekhmet were not just theologians who managed her offerings of beer and music. They were known as the Wab priests, the pure ones, and they were, in effect, Egypt's most specialized and feared physicians. This wasn't a contradiction. It was a terrifyingly logical monopoly. If a plague is an arrow from Sekhmet, an ordinary doctor or Sunu who deals in herbs and poultices is useless. You cannot treat a divine attack with a plant. You must go to the specialists, the only ones who serve the goddess herself. The priests of Sekhmet were, in essence, divine lion tamers. Their entire medical practice was based on the book of the heavenly cow. They knew what she liked. Their cures were not just medical. They were acts of appeasement. We have their texts. A prescription from a Wab priest might involve a rational component, an herbal remedy, a specific diet. But it was always delivered with a magical incantation, a ritual performance, and a prayer designed to soothe the heart of the angry goddess. The healing was a two-part process: treat the body and pacify the lioness. One without the other was pointless. This is why her priests were the only ones who could heal the plagues she sent. They were the only ones who had her ear. Historians still debate whether this entire medical system was, in fact, the most sophisticated protection racket in the ancient world. When a priest of Sekhmet came to your bedside, was he a doctor or was he an extortionist? Was he saying, "Here's a cure," or was he saying, "Pay the temple, make the offering, or my goddess will finish the job"? Was the cure the medicine, or was it the payment which proved your piety and convinced the priest to call off his divine lioness? The line is impossibly and perhaps deliberately blurred. Coda, let's close the file. We return, one last time, to Exhibit A, the forest of 700 black diorite statues. They are not just art, they are a 3,000-year-old record of fear. This case file was never just about a myth. It was about a paradox. Sekhmet is the Lady of Terror and the Lady of Life. She is the goddess who unleashes the plague, and she is the goddess whose priests are the only ones who can cure it. She is the source of the problem and the source of the solution. In this, the Egyptians created the most terrifyingly accurate personification of nature itself. Sekhmet is the Sekhem, the raw, amoral divine power of the universe. She is the brutal, burning, life-giving heat of the sun, the same heat that nourishes the crops and also brings the killing drought. She is the invisible mechanism of disease, a force that strikes without reason and can only be managed, never defeated. The book of the heavenly cow was not just a myth about a past event. It was a diagnosis. It was the case file that identified the threat. And the festival of intoxication and the 700 statues of Amenhotep III were the treatment plan. The entire cult of Sekhmet was a 3,000-year-long attempt to manage an unmanageable force. She is the ultimate divine paradox. The only way to be safe from Sekhmet is to be protected by Sekhmet. The case is closed, but the fear she represents, the fear of a sudden, invisible, and meaningless end, has never left the human heart. The human heart. The human heart.